So we're delighted to be invited to be part of this Masterclass series for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I'm Ian, this is Maggie, and we're going to be looking at the vital topic of leadership. And a couple of thoughts about leadership to kick off with. The absolute importance, and particularly for people in your roles as parliamentarians, of winning hearts and minds of people. Both those elements are really important, the intellectual, the practical, but also the emotional, the visionary, the passion. And the second thing, just as a quote to start off with all of this, you're all leaders. And I always think when I think about leadership of the great quote by Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "We must be the change we wish to see in the world." As leaders, we're going to talk about skills and behaviours. The most important thing that people will judge you on is how you show up, how you behave. That's what they will judge you on. So this topic, leadership, massively important. Wherever there's success, wherever there's failure, leaders and leadership is behind it. And what we're going to do here is look at an approach which we are drawing from research and best practice. We're going to share some models with you, and we're also going to get you to do a little bit of reflection and work. And Maggie's going to talk about the structure of the work of the Masterclass.
So this video is in 3 sections, and it's up to you how you work through it. You can either sit and watch the whole thing, or you can do it in three pieces. What we do recommend is there are activities in here, nothing awful. And it's a good idea to stop and do them at the appropriate times. You might have heard the expression, you can't learn to swim by reading a book. And it's the same with leadership. You've got to do the stuff. It isn't theoretical. So some of the activities that we'll introduce to you are for you to start thinking about how you can put this into practice with your own leadership.
And leadership is context specific and also person specific. The range of cultures and priorities within the Commonwealth is massive. So we're not here to tell you this is what you should do. What we're here to do is share some things that we know can work, but only you are in the position where you can decide how it could work for you. And our experience comes, we work as partners with a third person in an organisation called Towards Outstanding Leadership. This is our partnership. And we've worked with a whole range of different organisations in the UK and internationally, in the private sector, Ford Motor Company, for example, in the public sector within the UK, senior civil servants in central and local government and politicians, and also in the charitable sector, where we do a lot of work through the Cass Business School Centre for Charity Effectiveness. And what we find is, although every organisation is different, in terms of leadership, many of the principles and the behaviours that work are similar. So maybe we'll just tell you a little bit about ourselves.
So this is Ian Lawson. I met him when I started working at the Industrial Society in 2000. He's worked in leadership development for about 26 years. So whilst he was at the Industrial Society, he headed a part of the organisation that was called the Campaign for Leadership. We're going to talk to you later on in the first section of this video about some research we did at that organisation. It became known as the Work Foundation, and that research looked into what makes for outstanding leadership.
And my colleague Maggie, she's an executive coach and a specialist in leadership development. As she said, we met whilst working at the Industrial Society, and while she was there, her position was head of events, and she focused on advocacy and policy work, which drew her into a lot of discussions and relationships with the political world. And for the last 10 years or so, she's been focusing on leadership development.
Okay, so let's get started. The first section we're going to look at is around leadership. So in this section around leadership, we're going to be looking at
an overview from research and best practice around what good leadership looks like. And one of the first questions we need to address as leaders is not just what are the skills and behaviours that make for great leadership, but also what is leadership for, the purpose, because that should drive everything. And of course, as parliamentarians, you have very compelling purpose for serving your communities, your country, and the international community. And that's really important. The sense of purpose gives the why for people. It's an important motivator and an important reason for getting focus and direction. But it's not enough just to have the sense of purpose. How we go about it and leading in an ethical and values-based way is equally important. So when John Adair, the leadership thinker, said it's not enough just to have good leadership, we also need to have leadership for good, he was talking about both things. What are we trying to achieve and how do we go about it? There's an English leadership writer called David MacLeod who expresses it this way. He has two axes. One axis is about performance, or you might call it purpose or goals, i.e. what are we trying to achieve. Another one is around ethics, values, principles, if you like, how we behave. And he makes the point that it's not enough to, if you think this is the high part of the axis, to achieve our goals if we behave in a really unethical manner, nor is it good enough to behave really well but not achieve our purpose. So by this diagram, he's expressing that the sweet spot to be in is this top right hand corner of the graph. We're both achieving great things, things that are going to really add value, things that achieve our purpose, but we're also behaving in a value-based and ethical manner. Now Maggie's going to talk a little bit now about some of the findings from research done by the Work Foundation that we were both involved in.
So when we were deciding the scope of this research project, it was against the backdrop of the Enron scandal. There was questions being asked at the BBC around competitions and expenses, and also the MP expenses news breaking. So a lot of our establishment figures were called into question in a way, and we started thinking about what this meant in terms of leadership. What the research set out to do was to examine, is there a difference between good and outstanding leadership? And if there is, what is it? So really trying to pin down what those differences were, and then taking it further, looking at how we might be able to put these differences into practice so that people could build their own leadership capability. So from the research, a number of themes emerged. And the lead researcher went back into the data when it was all finished to see these outstanding leaders, are they rounded across all 9 themes, or are there spike behaviours or themes that came up more often than the others? And she found yes, there were 2 behaviours that came up more than the others. One was grow people through performance, and the second was being authentic to leadership self. So grow people through performance, what we found in the interviews was that this was the passion, really, of outstanding leaders. It was behind the purpose of all that they did. It got them out of bed in the morning. And it was about growing people to the best they could possibly be, not just performing in their role, but onwards throughout their careers. And there was a number of ways in which the outstanding leaders did this. The main way was how they turned up for their people. So rather than micromanaging, they wouldn't tell them what to do, but nor would they abandon them. So they'd still be around to offer challenge and support. And a term that came through the research was this idea of checking in, not checking up. So saying things like, how's it going, rather than where are you up to with that. One of the main ways in which they did this was to adopt a coaching approach. Just a way of leaving the responsibility with the with their direct reports to perform in the best way that they could while building their confidence. So that second spike thing is around authenticity, and people sometimes struggle with how can you be authentic if you're thinking about yourself in a role, because what we found here was that the outstanding leaders were authentic to their leadership role. They understood the importance of that role, so they wouldn't turn up at work having a bad day and say, no, it's fine if I'm in a bad mood, my team know me, they work around me, that's all fine. What the outstanding leaders said was, no, what people need more than that is they need consistency. They need to know how I'm going to react to whatever news they're bringing. And this was how they explained the idea of being authentic to the leadership role. So when they arrived at work, they step into the space, sort of putting their leadership hat on, is how a lot of them described it. And what also came out here is this idea of, as a leader, you're always on show. People will notice what you say and what you do, and also what you don't say and what you do, even when you don't think they're paying you any attention. And this is one of the things that people struggle most with. And there's a third theme that I'd like to talk about, which is this theme of holding time and space. And I particularly like this one because I think it encapsulates a lot of what leadership's about. Very often it isn't doing anything, it is just creating the space for others to do things. You tell a good story from the research.
Yeah, one of the organisations we looked at in the research was an energy company in the UK. And the senior manager that we interviewed ran a power station. And he talked about if there is an alarm going off at the power station, which, as you can imagine, is quite a serious thing, the last thing he would do is run out of his office and ask, what's going on? Are you doing what you need to do? Because he knew that that actually would just be getting in the way. He trusted his people, that he developed them, he briefed them, he had confidence in them, that they knew what to do, and if they needed further help, they'd come and ask him.
What we've also done since this research was published was look at other research, other models around leadership that align particularly well. And Ian's going to talk to us now about emotional intelligence.
So emotional intelligence is a phrase that was popularised by Daniel Goleman quite a long way back now. And he established that there were 6 different styles of leadership, 6 fundamental styles. And I'll outline those very briefly for you. And as I'm doing it, just think about how do they resonate with you? What would be your preferred style? And how good do you think you'd be at flexing your style? Because what Goleman says is they all have potentially strengths and downsides. But the key is to be able to see what's needed in what situation with what priorities, and also to be able to flex for different individuals who might have a different motivational need. And the 6 are directive, which some people call coercive. So this is very much, I'm telling you to do this, very, very clear, very command and control type approach. Excellent for clarity, focus, getting things done. Potential downside is that people can resent it, they don't buy into it, and of course you don't get any ideas from them. The second one is visionary, which some people call authoritative. This is the one where it tends to be a leader from the front, charismatic type of leader with a compelling vision. And this again can be extremely powerful. It's motivating, it helps garner people in the right direction, and can be very satisfying. The downside can be how relevant is the vision? Have things moved on? But also, do the people become dependent on that one leader? And I guess we can all think of examples where you have a really charismatic leader that when maybe they die or they move on, then actually things fall apart because people have become totally dependent on that one individual. Third one was affiliative. Affiliative is about wanting to create harmony, very people focused, excellent for when there are periods of stress, difficulties in relationships between team members, and can be very powerful in that sense. The downside can be that it becomes more important to have harmony than to get the job done or to achieve the purpose. Fourth one is participative. You might call it democratic, very consultative, engaging people before decisions are making, asking people how to do things. Fabulous for getting ideas, fabulous for getting buy-in and a different perspective, and can take longer and potentially can lose focus. Fourth one is pace setting. Pace setting is about speed, getting on with the task, getting things done. Clearly all of those things are potentially positive. It can lead to burnout if there's never any time to stop and recharge and reflect. And then finally, a coaching approach, which Maggie's already referred to, where the leader is trying to build not just the capability, but the confidence of the people that they work with, in order that those people can deliver without always having to rely on direction or briefing from their managers. And that can be perhaps the most powerful one in terms of developing the potential in the organisation. And what Goleman says is that emotionally intelligent leaders are able to flex what they need to focus on in particular circumstances. If they're able to competently adopt 4 of those 6, they're likely to be a very powerful leader for their organisation or their purpose. And 2 of those, which are directive and pace setting, whilst they can be very effective, those 2, if they're overused, are ones that actually can cause damage because they close people down and burn them out.
So at the start of this video, we promised that we'd share some practical tools with you. And here's the first one of those. It's very much following on from what Ian was saying about a coaching approach. It is a coaching tool. It's appreciative inquiry, which you may have heard of. We'll show you how we use it when we're working with people around outstanding leadership. So typically, if you're reviewing something, what you might do is make a note of what's working well and what isn't going so well. And of course then you'll have a list of either thing on either side. What we do with appreciative inquiry is we change this minus into a delta, and what you end up then is a list of what's going well and what would make it even better. So it changes the nature of the conversation. The focus becomes on what can we do, on the solution, rather than getting stuck in the problem or dwelling in how miserable things are. We start looking about how we can move forwards with this. This is particularly good if you're wanting people to be engaged and come up with ideas. When they're working out what will make something better, they're taking ownership of how to make that happen. So we'd like you to try working with this now. Think in terms of your own leadership and draw something like this for yourselves and just make a note of what's going well in terms of your own leadership and what would make you an even better leader. So pause the video and have a go at that, and we'll be back soon to talk about influencing.
Okay, so this section of the masterclass is around influencing, where we're going to be looking at some of our personal preferences and drivers, and some ways of motivating ourselves and others. When we think about this, perhaps the most important thing to think about to start with is who might our stakeholders be. As leaders, we have a huge number of different stakeholders. And what I'd like to do, perhaps Maggie and I are going to share a couple of models here that can help us identify who they may be, but then prioritise them in terms of where do we put our energy. So the first model I'd like to share with you is a way of narrowing down, if you like, where to put our focus. So if we think of these 2 axes, if you think of a stakeholder is a person or a party who has an interest in our project or our organisation or our purpose. That can be a lot of people. So if we think about 2 axes, one which we might call impact, and the other one interest. What these mean is impact is how much impact can a stakeholder have in helping me achieve the purpose that I'm trying to achieve. Interest is how far does that individual have an interest in the project or the purpose? Do they even know about it? And if we brainstorm and we break down this into 4 sections, where we should be putting our effort and our emphasis should be people who are interested, and also they can have a major impact. So that is where our focus should be. People who might be really interested, but actually they don't make much impact, we need to keep them informed. People who can have a high impact, but maybe they're not interested, so they are not so interested, so they don't want lots of communication. We need to keep them satisfied. And finally, people who have fairly low interest and probably fairly low impact, we need to monitor that. Keep it under review, because things can always change. But this is a helpful way, because you'll have lots of stakeholders are thinking, where do they fit and where do I put my energy? And we should be putting our energy, because we have finite resources, here as far as we can. And Maggie's going to take us now through another model where, having established this, we can break that down into more specific action.
So I'm going to share a very simple diagram with you, which is called Stakeholder Mapping. But you can use it for any working relationships that you have. And the way that it's divided is thinking about 8 relationships. So if you want to work along with us with this, you'll get the most from it. So if you want to pause and grab a paper and pen, do that now. So what you want to draw for yourselves, what you want to do is draw a circle in the middle of your page, which is you, for me, and then a series of circles around that. So 4 more circles around. And as you can see, it doesn't need to be perfect to be useful. So draw your circles, and then what you want to do is divide those into 8, like so. Now, each of these 8 segments represent one of your stakeholder relationships. So go ahead and label each of these as to who you're thinking of. And again, you might want to pause while you do that. When you've labelled these segments, what we're going to do now is think about the current state of the relationship with each of these stakeholders. And you write that in this first circle here. And it's up to you how you do that. So some people use words like good or bad or indifferent. Some people use a percentage or a mark out of 10. Whatever works for you, whatever's meaningful for you in terms of being able to describe the current state of the relationship with that particular stakeholder. So go ahead in each of these inner circles and write about the current state of the relationship with each of these stakeholders. So when you've done that, we're going to think about how you would like it to be. And that's what happens in this second circle here. This is where you're going to write about the desired state of the relationship. So again, using the same system that you've worked with, whether it's numbers or words, go ahead and in this circle here, write about how you'd like these relationships to be. Then in the outside circle, you're going to think about what can you do to move from current state to desired state. And here you're going to describe what actions are within your control. This outside circle is where it becomes useful, because this is when you're thinking about, well, what can you do to move these relationships along? People find this helpful because it makes them focus in on these individual stakeholder relationships that they have. I've also seen this, people will use it as a team. So instead of me at the middle, they will put our team and think about the relationships that our team have. And that can be really helpful, because within that you find where colleagues have got one good relationship and other colleagues can sail in on the back of that and build stronger relationships for themselves too. I've also seen people use this if they've got a team that they lead or manage. So thinking about where are the relationships with each of my team members. So as you can see, it's called stakeholder mapping, but you can transfer it and use it for all sorts of working relationships.
Thanks, Maggie. So this, having identified these stakeholders and what you want to do, leads us really nicely into looking at the different motivators and preferences and styles that we need to adopt with different people. And so we're going to share two models here. Both of them come from a thing called transactional analysis. So the first one is a thing called strokes. What a stroke is a unit of recognition. So if I say hello to someone when I'm coming into the building in the morning, I'm giving them a stroke. I'm recognising that they exist. And strokes appear in a number of different ways. They can be what we call conditional, and a conditional stroke is about something that you do, or they can be unconditional. And unconditional is about who you are rather than what you do, and they can be positive or they can be negative. So I'll give you a couple of examples. A positive conditional stroke is, I might say to Maggie, thank you for the report you got in. That was a great report. It was in on time. It addressed all the things that we needed. That would be positive, and it's based on something she's done. A negative conditional. So negative can mean just that something wasn't right. So like it was in half a day late. That would be something that isn't good and is about what she's done or not done. But it can also be developmental. So I might say, great report. It would have been even better if you'd done a short summary at the beginning of it to make it easier for me to read. And that's going back to the appreciative inquiry approach that we talked about in the first section. So that would be that. Unconditional is not about what you do. This is about recognising someone for being a human being rather than a human doing. So if one is wandering around your place of work, for example, walking the job, or management by wandering around is what the jargon is, it's chatting to people, it's asking them how they are, maybe checking in about their family. It's things that are not connected with having to achieve a task. But what it is doing is showing that you value them as a human being. And that will be here, a positive one. A negative unconditional, a classic one here, especially for busy leaders, is that we are so focused on what's in our mind. Maybe we're coming from a meeting, or we're going to what we think might be quite a difficult meeting, that we just forget to acknowledge people. It's not our intention to come across negative, but that's the way it can be taken. And this is a complete no-no in terms of leadership. One should never give a negative unconditional stroke, because it's like saying you're useless or you're of no value, but without explaining why. So have a think about this, and people are normally quite good at this, praising for people for what they've done. Often they shy away from maybe what hasn't been done so well, or they don't spend enough time thinking about how it could be better. But this one can quite easily be forgotten just because there's no obvious immediate benefit in terms of task for doing it. But this is really important in terms of building good, trusting relationships. Now Maggie's going to talk a little bit about another model called drivers.
And I think what you were saying about this one, Ian, very often we're just preoccupied, so we get that wrong. And do you remember what we said about authenticity? About everything you see and do, everything you say and do is noticed. That's when people can get the wrong impression based on nothing at all that you've consciously done. Ian said there was a couple of models we wanted to share with you from transaction analysis, and the other one's behavioural drivers. Now, we have quite a bit of fun with this one, so please do. Again, it's a draw along, so get yourself a piece of paper, and it doesn't matter how rough it is, it's not what's important about this. So what you want to do is roughly have 5 sort of columns. Each of these are going to represent a different driver. Let me make my lines longer. Okay, so the first one of these is called Be Perfect. And this is, as you might have worked out, it's about if you're a bit of a perfectionist. And by the way, there's no such thing as a bit of a perfectionist, but that's how people tend to describe it. So if you know that that's something that is a strong driver for you, that it's important to get things right, then just mark where on here this is for you. So if it is important to get things right, it'll be quite high. If actually it really doesn't matter to you, then low. Another one here is Be Strong. And this is about, it's not about not having or showing emotion, it's about suppressing it when you think that's the right thing to do. So typically people who have a high Be Strong driver will be people that when they're faced with any sort of adversity think the right thing to do is head down, power through. So that would suggest a high Be Strong driver. So again, just mark for you, do you feel that you've got that? Sometimes it gets described in our culture as a stiff upper lip, doesn't it? So if you think Be Strong is a driver or a quality that you recognise in yourself, then score it high. If not, then low again. This one always makes you smile because Ian has got a ridiculously high hurry up driver. It's amazing.
I would have started with this one.
It's amazing that he can stand still and listen to it. I've just got a normal human hurry up driver, and this is around impatience. It's about exactly as all of these, what they say. Very often you'll spot the people with the high hurry up driver because they're people who can't sit still. Their leg will be tapping, they'll be tapping on the table, they'll be off down the corridor while you're still speaking to them. So just mark for you, how high is your hurry up driver? Fourth one is called Please Others, and this is about putting what you think is important to other people ahead of yourself. And it can, if it turns up a lot for you, it can end up with you being a bit of a doormat. So again, think about how important is that to you. We've got a colleague who claims to have a high Please Others driver, and this manifests around Christmas time when people say, what do you want for Christmas? And he says, whatever you like will be fine. He thinks that is a Please Others response. His sister-in-law has pointed out to him that actually what would be more helpful is if he could just tell her what he would really like. That would make her happy. So that's how he's addressed that. So just notice where that sits for you and mark that for you now. Now, what am I missing? We always miss one.
Try hard.
Thank you. It's funny that I missed this one because for years of working with this model, I used to ignore try hard and think, oh no, that's not me. And then I realised it really is me, and that's often the case with this. The ones that you resist or dismiss are probably quite high for you. Try hard is about starting from scratch almost with any piece of work that you're given, of wanting, you know, if I've not worked really hard on it, it can't be good enough. We have an expression here particularly where parents would say at school, well, so long as you tried your best. And that's how I realised that I have that as a driver, because that was what Mum and Dad always said come exam time at school, so long as you've tried your hardest. So what had gone in here was I have to try my hardest. And of course sometimes we do, but not at everything. Sometimes it's fine. And you can see how if you've got some of these all being high, you've got a perfect storm for wearing yourself out. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the third section that's about resilience. A good way that we find of working with this is not only doing it for yourself, but then sharing it with a colleague who knows you well, or doing it as a team. So Ian, do you want to?
Yeah, so we work a lot together, and if I drew mine, I would have a low B perfect, probably a pretty high B strong like Maggie, a very high hurry up, a very high please others, I think, and a pretty low try hard. And because we understand this and we work together a lot, that's quite helpful for us to know, because if we need detail and accuracy, it's really, that plays to Maggie's strength. If we need to get on and do something and get a bit more task related, that's probably quite a strength of mine. But we also need to act as a sense check on one another. And sometimes just knowing this can help us avoid potentially, not exactly conflict, but getting irritable with one another because we have a different preference.
It particularly, and this is why we smile about this one, I think, is the hurry up. Ian's is sillily high, so much so that he doesn't think I've got one. How it often manifests with him is I'll be trying to explain something to him and he'll be off down the corridor saying, I've got it. And I know he hasn't, because I haven't finished telling him. So instead of either worrying about why he doesn't stop and listen to me, does he think that I don't have anything to add, what I'm able to say is, can you just slow down your hurry up driver and just listen? So instead of internalising what is it about me that Ian doesn't want to listen to, I talk about the behaviour. I use that label instead of what he's doing. And we found from working with others, it's much more helpful when we're talking about these influencing relationships to know these about one another and then talk about the behaviour rather than how that's making me feel.
Final couple of thoughts on this model. These are not good or bad. They all have a potential positive side and a potential downside. And the second, we have our own preferences, but that doesn't mean we can't operate in a different mode. So I can turn up my Be Perfect drive if I need to, and turn down my hurry up, and likewise Maggie can turn up her hurry up driver.
And importantly, over the years, my Be Perfect I don't think is as high anymore, because I do a different sort of work now. It doesn't need to be, it's not as detail orientated, so I'm able to dial that down some. These are helpful to know, not only in terms of how you work together and knowing what's important to other people, but also in knowing what motivates people so that you can work better with them in that way.
And when we talk about motivation, which is at the final bit of this section, people sometimes think of motivation as I as a leader need to motivate you. Actually, maybe think of it a slightly different way, that I as a leader need to create a climate or an environment where you can be motivated, because actually most motivation comes from within. So we're going to share with you now a model that you can use both for yourself and for colleagues that can give some insights into this.
Again, it's a draw along, so another bit of paper. It's called the diamond model because what I'm going to draw now is meant to be in the shape of a diamond. So draw for yourselves a diamond shape. Each of these 4 points represents a different motivation. So along the top here we've got achievement. And this is if it's important to you to feel that you're achieving stuff. If things like job title, salary, status are all important, and that's not to say they're bad things, it's just recognising those are motivators for you. Have a think about how important is that to you. And what I'd like you to do is to score that in terms of 1 to 10, where 10 is high, so 10 is very important. So just mark for yourselves how important is a sense of achievement to you. Put a little cross on that line. Then over here we have growth. Now this is about curiosity, love of learning, wanting to stretch and develop. People who have a high growth motivator will love doing training and going on courses, but they're not particularly bothered about the certificate, they just want the learning. The achievement people love the learning too, but they want the certificate or they want the letters. So just for yourself, how important is it to you that you have a sense of growth in your life? And again, just put a little cross to mark that. Along the bottom here, this is meaning. And this is about how important is it to you that you have a sense of purpose, that you have a sense that you're part of something bigger than just you going through your life. And again, put a little cross on how important is that to you, that you have meaning in your everyday life. And then over here is fun and enjoyment. So how important is it to you that you're having fun? Is it, is it important that you laugh all the time? An interesting statistic, little children laugh about 150 times a day, grown-ups 15, and I find that quite sad. Right. When you've put your crosses, join them up. And then the second step in this is to have a think about how much of these are you experiencing now, are you experiencing in your current role, and go around again and mark that on for yourselves. And then join them up. And what you can see here, and it's not unusual for them not to map exactly over, and if they do, then good. It means that you're mapping what's important to you with your daily experience. If it isn't, there are a series of questions that you can ask yourselves, or you can work together with other people to ask these.
And this is a great model that you can use as a leader at maybe an annual appraisal or a review with people who work with or for you. It's because it's nice and simple and easy to explain, and if you do this and there's areas of difference, as Maggie says, you can then as a leader try and explore with that person. So what are the opportunities that I as a leader can help you with in order to help you achieve more of these things, because this is more likely to help motivate somebody.
Good questions to have in mind are around time. So is this something that's short term? So for instance, you can see that these are lower than my ideal on these, and it might just be it's particularly busy just now. By the time we break for the next holiday, there'll be a bit more time. These will grow back again. The focus will change. So it's just short term. In the next month or so, I see that changing. Or it might be for some people in organisations, sometimes there might be a big change going on that really upsets them, and it might affect their sense of meaning. So then they'll use one of these others to compensate for that, to get them through that period. So those are all useful ways of thinking about what you might do with this. In the next section, we're going to look at personal resilience, and having a clue about these motivating factors can help us build that too.
Okay, this final section of the masterclass, we're going to be taking a look at personal resilience. This is really important in leadership, because if you as a leader are not fit, feeling good, have energy, you're not going to be in the best position to lead the people that you work with. So we're going to look at a couple of techniques that can help you there, because it can be a draining and stressful position, particularly as a parliamentarian or a senior leader. And so what we're looking at is methods to what Stephen Covey calls sharpen your saw. It's a way of keeping yourself fresh, energised, knowing when to stop and fall back and look at ways to keep yourself energised.
And what we find is people aren't always very good at prioritising their personal resilience. We tend to, especially if we've got a Be Strong driver, those of you who saw that last section on influencing, we tend to power through. Even when we're feeling tired, just keep going, which is okay for a short space of time, but we get into trouble if we try to do that for too long. There's been quite a lot of research into this recently, or in recent years, and it probably started with a movement called positive psychology that was started by Martin Seligman, a psychologist in America. And the work that he and his team did looked at what worked well with people rather than waiting for them to be ill and then need fixing. So you see how this links back as well to appreciative inquiry. What's working well, how can we make it better? So Seligman and his team did a whole lot of research, particularly with the American Army, looking at post-traumatic stress disorder, which, you know, some years ago wasn't even a term that we were familiar with. And what they came up with was this idea of psychology and the related therapies shouldn't be a case of what they call the tail wagging the dog. So what they did work on was, if people are going to be going into stressful situations, so if they're on the front line of a battle, we know that's going to be stressful. So rather than letting them go there and then pick them up afterwards, about equipping them better to be there in the first place. So building the strength before it's needed. So that's where this resilience work comes from. A little model that some leaders who we work with find really useful is called Vital Friends. And of these, there are 8 of these friends, and it's important that you identify someone who fulfills each of these roles for you. It's also important that it isn't the same person, because what happens if they go away? So you can have the same person for no more than 3 of these roles. Now they are a builder. Now a builder is someone who will develop you. Someone who might be a mentor or a manager, someone who's going to bring you on, who's going to see the potential that you have and help you build and develop that. The second relationship is a champion. Someone who is on your side, someone who will defend you when you're not in the room, someone who will always speak well for you. Next, a collaborator. Collaborators are people who will work together with you to get the best that you're trying to achieve. They get what it is you're trying to do. And following on from that, companion. These are people who are on your same wavelength. You've got shared experiences and interests. So very much a vital friend. Then connectors. Connectors will make relationships for you. They might be someone who you can do the stakeholder mapping exercise with. People who will spot who it's useful for you to make a connection with. Ian's always been particularly good at this. In these 20 odd years, maybe more now, of leadership development, I've watched him put people in touch with other people because he can see that that's a good connection for them to have. The next relationship is someone who's an energizer, someone who is fun. And the first time that I did this, my learning from this exercise for myself, was I needed to see more of my friend Lively Liz, because I recognised that I wasn't, and I was missing that. So this is very much how to use this, spot what works well and what's missing for you. And a mind opener. So this is someone who either inspires you or asks you questions that causes you to think more, or who you might not even know. It could be a public figure, but who presents work that you find mind-opening, that causes you to stop and think. And then a navigator. And again, this might be more of a professional relationship. It could be, for instance, a mentor. Someone will help you, guide you, and offer advice and experience. So take a moment and identify someone who fulfills each of these relationships for you.
And you can see how this model, you can use it with the stakeholder mapping model. So you could use it specifically on who are my critical friends, and then work out, okay, so if I want that person to be my builder, for example, what is the state of the relationship? What would I like it to be? What can I do to get to where I want it to be?
I mentioned Energiser, and that being a fun person, someone who you get energy from, and Ian's going to talk a bit more about the importance of that sort of relationship.
So what I want to talk about is a model that is around what fuels us. Now, if you can imagine a big water tank, or a fuel tank if you like, as a leader or as a human being, we need to have an amount of fuel that we can draw on, because of course it's draining out all of the time. We're spending energy when we're doing things, when we're living, when we're leading. And what's important in this model is two things. One is to think about what are the things that drain us, and sometimes that's just activity, but it can be particular jobs, could be travelling, could be particular individuals that take more energy from us than perhaps the norm. So we need to think about those things, but also what are the things that fuel us? So how do we top up? How do we replenish? And this is where the Vital Friends, for example, can come in as part of that. I know there are certain people that if I feeling a little bit low in energy or maybe just a little bit down, if I spend time with certain people, that will replenish my energy. And it can be all sorts of different aspects of that. It might be fun, it might be new ideas, it might be just a sounding board. But it's not just about friends, it's about other activities as well. So for me, for example, a really good way for me to re-energise is I like to lie on the sofa, put my headphones on and listen to classical music, particularly Tchaikovsky. You know, that really, really energises me. Different people will have different ways of doing it. It might be getting out in the fresh air and walking, might be reading. But think about what those things are, and classically with this model, if you make a list of these things, sometimes you can just cut down on them. So, you know, for example, certain individuals can be very draining. What flexibility have you got in terms of how many you spend your time with them? So make a list of these things and try and do less of them, and particularly make a list of these things, identify what they are, and do more of them.
And why it's particularly important to make a list is when you're feeling drained, when you need topping up, you're probably not going to be in the best state to think about what fuels you. And recognise they can be really tiny things. You know, lying on a sofa listening to music, you don't need any special equipment or a big budget or even loads of time. So what fuels you, what tops you up, can be very small, simple things. Spending time with your grandchildren, admiring some flowers, lighting a candle, whatever it is, or quite big, like go on a nice holiday. So make sure there's mix in your fuel list, and also how low. Where's the danger point? If you think about a petrol gauge, where does it get red here? Where's too low? How high do you want to keep topped up before it starts to get harder and you start to dredge up some of the stuff from the bottom?
Because if you get down here, it's really important that you change something. If you don't change something, that's suddenly going to disappear, and then you're in really dangerous territory.
So hopefully you find these exercises helpful in terms of building your resilience. We're in that leadership space of simple, not easy.
So thank you for listening in and watching the masterclass. We hope you found it raises some insights and has been practical. We'd like to finish with a couple of quotes, or quoting a story about making a difference and making an impact. So I'd like to start off with the story about the mother and a little girl who are walking along the seashore. It's a very windy day and the wind is washing up huge waves that are washing thousands of tiny starfish onto the beach. And the little girl is walking along the beach, picking up these starfish and throwing them back into the sea. And her mum says to her, "What are you doing, darling? You know, there are thousands. They go as far as the eye can see. You're not making any difference at all." The little girl picks up one, throws it back into the sea and says, "Well, I made a big difference to that one." And I think in terms of leadership, that's what we need to think about. Sometimes the challenges facing us seem daunting and we feel like a tiny cog in a huge machine. But actually, focus on what you can do, because those seemingly small differences that we make can have a massive cumulative effect and can change people's lives.
And what I'd like to share with you is a piece written by Marianne Williamson and quoted by Nelson Mandela in his inauguration speech. And it's influenced and inspired a lot of leaders down through the years since it was written. So, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people around you won't feel insecure. We are all meant to shine, as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically releases others.